It looks like we are live. Kenneth, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Sorry about the technical issues. I don't know what is causing those. Would you mind telling us a little about yourself before we get started? Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, there's no sound working. Damn it. I hate technical issues. All right. Stop sharing screen. Can I invite people? Disable camera. Invite guests. All right, I'll send you a new link for the other server. Emails. So you can just close this screen. This one's not going to work for right now. Hey guys, how's it going? Sorry about the audio issues. Let me know if you can hear me. Audio default. Yeah, that's making noise. Hey, how's it going? This one seems to be working better. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you as well.
Perfect. And if you want, there should be a setting somewhere where you can, like a gearbox, where you can increase the quality of the stream. There's like a high definition, make your picture clear.
Oh yeah, there's the high definition setting. I see it.
Perfect.
Yep. High res too?
Sure.
Okay, how's that now?
Good. Sounds perfect. All right, so to start over, Kenny, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So yeah, my name is Kenneth Pearce. I am currently a professor, lecturer in philosophy at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. I'll shortly be moving to James Madison University in Virginia. I've written quite a lot on the history of 17th and 18th century philosophy, but also in contemporary philosophy of religion. My most recent book is There a God? A Debate, which is written together with the atheist philosopher Graham Oppy from Monash University in Australia. So thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. So I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe there is no evidence for a God, or that all the different evidences can be better explained by naturalism. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there is for belief in a God?
Sure. So in the book, I focus on two main grounds for belief in God. I don't think these are the only two, but they're the two that I think are kind of most interest, or that I wanted to take the opportunity to develop. The first is a cosmological argument from contingency. So the basic idea here is that if you're going to have complete explanation for everything, I focus on explanation for the total sequence of causes and effects in reality. If you're going to have a total explanation for that, it's going to have to be something that goes beyond science somehow. And the kind of classical God or traditional sort of God is kind of one good explanation, one good way of approaching that. The second is an argument from religious experience. And here the idea is kind of drawing on Thomas Reid in the 18th century. The Descartes' project of rejecting everything and starting over from scratch is totally infeasible. We have to start from where we are, and we have to start from a general attitude of trust in our faculties. And if we start from a general attitude of trust in our faculties, then we can't just kind of casually dismiss some category of human experience or human life. And religious experience is a quite common and widespread phenomenon in human culture. And the question is how to make sense of it and whether we can regard it as trustworthy as revealing the truth, or whether we have to regard it as somehow hallucinatory. And the idea is that a kind of reason in favor of theism and against naturalism is that uh, theism can regard that religious experience as trustworthy, whereas naturalism has to regard it as hallucinatory.
Okay, so let's start with the second one because we don't really get much chance to talk about that. It seems to me that our religious experiences we have a defeater for them, and the defeater comes in the form of evolutionary biology and the fact that we know many beliefs in the human mind forms are inherently faulty. There's thousands of fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like religious experience can fit neatly into this category we already have a substantial amount of evidence for. So even if we did start with the belief that we should trust beliefs until demonstrated otherwise, we seem to have a sufficient defeater for why we shouldn't trust those kinds of religious experiences.
Yeah. So I think that is, I would say, there's a reasonable position to be taken there by someone who has a prior commitment to naturalism. That there do exist good naturalistic explanations of why people have these sorts of experiences, right? And there is empirical research on different kinds of religious experience. But the thing is, it's very hard to actually say what the difference is between religious experience and something like sensory experience without presupposing that you already know that there's no object for the religious experience to refer to. So, for instance, we have perfectly good evolutionary neurobiological explanation of the visual experience that I'm having right now. But we believe that it's kind of connected up in the proper way with a real world and therefore that it's reliable. We also kind of, we can't, when we start from this attitude of trust, right? If we didn't start from that attitude of trust, we wouldn't be able to do any science or get off the ground, right? But as we do that science, we discover that our trust in our senses and our trust in our memory and so on shouldn't be unlimited. We learn kind of particular biases to correct for, particular forms of optical illusion, and so on. And the question is kind of exactly which things should we regard as reliable and unreliable. And so my claim is that a kind of attractive feature of a worldview, of any kind of view of the world, is if it requires fewer and simpler of those carve outs, right? When we're saying, like, these are the things, this is where our trust kind of runs out, and we start thinking that our experiences are less reliable. And so I'm thinking
What do you
that,
mean by fewer carve outs? So like fewer places where it's less reliable?
yeah, so we say, in general, we trust our experience, right? Except in these cases, right? And what we want is kind of a simple theory of that can account for kind of why our faculties are generally reliable but unreliable in these cases, or a theory that fits well into our total worldview. And so the kind of question is, if you don't start out assuming that religious experience can't possibly have an object, right? Then do you have a well motivated reason that kind of fits coherently with everything we understand about the world and human experience and whatnot for thinking that that experience is delusive? Um, Now, I think that's not a super obvious question because because there is so much variety of religious experience. No one can say that all of it's perfectly reliable. People form lots of different beliefs based on it. But I think if we kind of start out by taking it seriously, then it provides us good reason to think that that maybe there's something to all of this, and maybe we should be looking for what kind of is the most reasonable version of a view that would regard people as having a veridical experience, an experience of something real.
So my first thought would be, is I agree with you that you can't start with the presupposition there's no supernatural. That would defeat the point of the entire debate. So from my starting point, I I cogito. I think therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, and I think that's a good starting point. And so I start with I exist, and of the experiences I have, some are different than others. Like for example, I can imagine a unicorn, but I don't see a unicorn. So there's some difference between my sensory experience and my imagined mental experience. And I want to find a way to differentiate between these two. Which of the things that I see are mental experiences and not things that I should be seeing, that should be sensory experiences. And to do this, we need some methodology to differentiate which ones are justified sensory experiences and which ones are imaginary experiences. And the way to do that seems to be with novel testable predictions. Science seems to be very, very good at this, is at differentiating which of these experiences we should believe are real and correspond to reality and which don't. And if we use that methodology, it seems like we can get most of everything we agree upon in the world, both the theists and the atheists. Most of the things we agree upon are there using this methodology. And it's only the things that the theists or the supernaturalists espouse that are rejected by this methodology. And it seems to be a reasonable methodology to start with. I'm not presupposing there's no supernatural, and there are, in fact, ways to be evidence of the supernatural. It just seems like the claims of religious experience and of supernatural events seem to be the same kind of claims epistemically as homeopathy or different kinds of magic or voodoo. And so using this methodology, it doesn't seem to be affected by your criticism that it's presupposing away the supernatural, and does seem to give us a reliable methodology to filter those kind of beliefs as the untrustworthy ones.
Sure. So I think one of the questions here is how we're defining scientific methodology and what makes some methodology scientific. Personally, I think that the kind of the distinction between science and philosophy, or the boundary between them, is pretty fuzzy. And so I tend to think of it much more in terms of we're just trying to do good reasoning, whether you call that scientific or not, be responsive to evidence, and build a view of the world that has a lot of coherence and that's responsive to the experience that we have. Like I was saying, I don't think that you can kind of start from just the cogito and nothing else. If you start there, I don't think you'll ever have good reason to believe in an external world or other minds or anything. After all, Descartes himself appeals to God in the course of trying to get to an external world and other minds, right? I think we got to start with kind of the beliefs we already have and then subject them to rational criticism. And that's what science does, and it's what philosophy does, and so on. And so I don't think it's true that not all of that some of our experiences give rise more directly to accurate predictions than others. But we also have a lot of kind of experience, of a lot of beliefs that are kind of trying to tie all those specific predictions together and are not kind of as concretely or precisely tied to specific predictions. And that happens even in science, that you've got kind of broader theoretical frameworks versus very specific predictions.
Yep.
And so these kind of broader things like belief in God, or how do we understand and make sense of religious experience, all these things are going to tie into much broader framework questions, right? And then the question is going to be whether the framework hangs together and makes sense, and whether it makes sense of our experience.
So my first thoughts would be like the difference to me between the different kinds of scientific theories are the ones that say if my hypothesis is true and it explains all of this data, then here is some new thing that we would expect to see that we haven't seen yet. And
Mhm.
if we
Yeah.
discover that, that's good reason to believe whatever the hypothesis is. You could make it magical leprechauns, as far as I'm concerned, it's still fine. So,
Right.
but if you just say, I think magical leprechauns explain everything we see, but make no new predictions that we can confirm, that seems to be a much weaker hypothesis that you probably shouldn't accept, because anybody could just replace magic leprechauns with pixies or God or fairies or whatever. And so to me, the ones that are justified in believing are the ones that say, here's everything we know about the world, here's what I think explains that, and here's a prediction of something we don't know about the world. And if you're
Yeah.
able to accurately predict something we don't know about the world, because our minds are very bad at that, that's a very good reason to believe that that model corresponds to reality. And so I think that until you can do that and predict something we don't know and get it right, it is not a reasonable thing to believe is more than just our imagination.
So yeah, I'm inclined to agree that these kind of predictions are a very strong form of evidence, right? And the more concrete and specific they are, the more public they are, the more repeatable they are, the stronger they are. Now, even within science, of course, there's kind of varying degrees of evidence for different scientific claims. There's a lot of variation in how amenable to that type of concrete prediction particular forms of science are. And you've got to ask questions about kind of how much do you believe in, say, social sciences, right? That are much less concrete in their predictions, and have a lot more uncertainty around them. I think we should be less confident in them than we are in physics, but I think we should still kind of accept, with an appropriate degree of an appropriate lesser degree of confidence, those results.
Sure.
Um, I do think that when it comes to religious experience, um, especially for a person who has those experiences themselves, right? There's a question about whether their whole kind of theology, their set of beliefs about God and their practices and so forth, is continuing to make sense of their ongoing experiences and the experiences that they hear reported by others. So it's not the case that it's not answerable to anything, or that it doesn't. I mean, prediction seems like too strong a word because it's a little perhaps too vague and fuzzy for that. But it generates some expectations, right, that people have about what kinds of religious experiences you would expect to see in yourself, in your own community and culture, and in broader cultures across the world. And so the question is, whether it makes sense of all those phenomena.
What do you mean by make sense of in that case? Because to me, when you say make sense of, that's more like, I believe a leprechaun caused all of these things we see, but it seems like anyone can make sense of all of the facts we know of. Problem of underdetermination, you can just literally make up anything you want to explain everything. Two magical bunnies threw poo at each other and generated the universe or something. But to
Yeah.
in order to make it justified, it seems like it would have to be either the most plausible explanation here, or it would have to make predictions of some kind. It could be like, I pray to God to heal an amputee, amputee heals. That's great. That would be phenomenal evidence. But just being able to make sense of it doesn't seem to be a strong form of evidence, because anything can do that. There's literally infinitely many things that can do that.
Yeah, I mean, sense making comes in degrees, right? So you can have a totally kind of gerrymandered hypothesis where you just kind of build in all of the phenomena. Say, here I've got this theory, and it's just a list of all the phenomena, right? And then your theory entails the phenomena. Very nice. But what we really want is something that's kind of tied together, that has a degree of coherence, right? That can kind of unify and explain the phenomena somehow in a way that's deeper than that, right? It seems less gerrymandered, and that fits together as part of a larger worldview. And this is one of the reasons. One of the things I say in the book is that I actually think the argument from religious experience and the kind of metaphysical arguments, like the argument from contingency, actually can be mutually supportive. Because part of what the argument from contingency is trying to do is say, hey, there's this kind of compelling metaphysical picture of the world that allows for the existence of a being who's an appropriate object of religious experience. And if we didn't have something like that, if we didn't have a total view of the world that allows for that, then actually I think we should endorse the kind of claim that it's hallucinatory, right? Just like if I start seeing pink elephants, I don't know. I don't know of any kind of coherent, attractive view of the world that makes the existence of a pink elephant in my office more likely than me hallucinating, right? And so we do need to do some kind of worldview construction and say, is there a broader view of the world that allows for these experiences to be veridical? And how does that view compare overall with the naturalist view that's committed to them being hallucinatory? So I think that's kind of, when I say explain, what I mean is, can we construct an overall view of the world that fits together, that is kind of attractive in a variety of respects, and that kind of allows for this to be real experience of something that really exists, and that the particular experiences we're having kind of make sense within that broader framework. So
Sure.
that's the kind of thing I think that theist needs.
Sure. So my first intuition is that our religious experiences that people have, and I've had them, I was used to be religious, don't seem to correspond to some kind of a necessary being or like some non-spaceless, timeless, immaterial mind that isn't in any way interacting or changing its beliefs of any kind. All of the religious experiences we have seem to be very human. It's we
Mhm.
experience talking to a human that is very, very similar to us in many ways, and its beliefs are very similar to us in many ways. And when people think they're talking to God, we look at the neurology, and it seems like the part of the brain that activates is the exact same part that activates when you're talking to yourself. And uncoincidentally, a lot of the beliefs that God endorses seem to be the same beliefs that the person themselves has when they're talking to God. So this all seems to indicate that whatever religious experiences are, they don't seem to correspond to whatever a necessary timeless spaceless being might be. It seems to correspond to more human personalities of some kind. And so I wouldn't see the connection between, even if there was a necessary being of some kind, what would that be indicative of the kinds of personal experiences we have?
Yeah. So this, to me, this is the thing that I really, I'm a philosopher and not much of a debater, right? So that means that I'm really interested in the puzzles and problems with my own view of the world. And this question of these sort of metaphysical arguments about God that I've been working on for a while, this question about, like, what, if anything, do they actually have to do with religion, was a philosophical question that I was interested in, that I was feeling like I and other analytic philosophers hadn't explored enough. And so I was kind of, part of what I was doing in this was trying to make space in the book to explore that question, because I thought it was important. Um, and so I do think that there is a certain amount of tension between, particularly for myself as a Christian, there's a certain amount of tension between, how God's described in the Bible, between how ordinary Christians think about God, the ones who haven't studied a bunch of philosophy, and the way God appears in these sort of metaphysical arguments. So that's, and then there's the question about whether that metaphysical God could even be connected in any way with actually practicing a religion, right?
And
So
specifically the personal experiences people have, because that I think is the important part of your argument, is that the experiences they have, what does that correspond to?
right, so that's like one set of issues, and then there's this other set of issues about the fact that people come away from religious experiences almost always thinking that they confirm whatever religion they already had.
Yeah.
Now, there are exceptions to that, and I think the exceptions are really important, right? But most people, that's how it is. So I take those to be kind of two separate and interesting problems. So on the first, the two of them are connected. And the thing that I want to say is that all of our experiences, including our sensory experiences, are interpreted through the lens of background theories and assumptions that we have about the world. Our way of understanding them is, it's learned from culture. We have a set of concepts. There's a, Thomas Reid calls this acquired perception. There's a bunch of contemporary philosophical literature about the way learning things, gaining concepts, for instance, changes the way we see the world. Um, so, for instance, if you know the difference between pine trees and fir trees, you just kind of see things as pine trees, right? Whereas when you were first learning that, you might have had to think about specific criteria and whatever. Um, and there are practices that we engage in William Alston calls these doxastic practices of forming beliefs that we learn for how we use our sense experience and what kind of things we look at, like when you look out the window to see if it's raining. And there's just tons of background beliefs built into our interpretation of sensory experience. Now, religious experience is going to be obviously like that too. There's reason to believe that it's like that in a much bigger way. There's some reason to believe that people with quite different theologies might be having rather similar experiences. For instance, advanced mystics, both Christians in the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions and Buddhists report very similar experiences of losing the sense of self and feeling this oneness with the universe. And then they go interpret that in terms of their theologies, right? So I think what's going on here is that there is kind of a lot of flexibility in the interpretation. I think that if we're going to make sense of if I have religious experience and I'm going to make some kind of sense of it, I have to rely on an interpretive tradition. There's no way of kind of starting over from scratch any more than I could do that with sensory experience. And I think something that can help a lot is relying on these kind of more extraordinary religious experiences that I don't have that other people do. So some people do have these quite unusual experiences that kind of change their whole view of the world. And kind of many of the founders of the world religions reported things like that, but there are also other kind of major figures along the way. And I see this as being, in some ways, it's kind of analogous to, like, I can interpret my experience of this table as an experience of quarks and electrons, but I wouldn't come up with ideas about quarks and electrons by seeing the table, right? Some
Sure.
physicists had some quite unusual experiences that I've never had and wouldn't know how to interpret if I did, by kind of constructing particle accelerators and whatever, that gave rise to a certain way of interpreting ordinary sensory experience. And I think something like that goes on in religious traditions, that we have these people who had quite extraordinary experiences who that change their view of the world and that provide a way for everyone else to interpret their experiences. And then the question we all have to ask is whether to trust those people, and perhaps even more difficult, which ones to trust and how far to trust them, right? As we're trying to figure out how to interpret our view of the world.
And how would you answer that question? Because my initial thought or response is that there are lots of people who have very profound experiences which change their life, and many of them are epileptic or have seizures. And these things are like Robert Sapolsky, the professor of Stanford, did an entire lecture on how religions were started by schizophrenics because they had massive brain electrical things that had these awesome ideas, just like you have when you're on a drug trip. And people on drug trips also report these powerful, profound experiences that change their lives. So it seems like we have a correlation between many similar kinds of experiences that we can have very good evidence to believe is a purely natural phenomenon. What reason do we have to accept those testimonies of this super profound experience as being true, as opposed to these just hallucinations that we seem to have a good evidence for?
So first, this gets into other difficult issues, but I don't think that in order to take these religious experiences seriously, you need to think that there's some kind of supernatural cause of them, that there's a disruption in the natural causal order. I think you can take them seriously as revelatory of God, even if you think that they also have a fully scientific explanation. That gets into other complicated issues. But in terms of the epistemology, I'm going to view this just like everything else. So I come to philosophy or to rational thought, science, or whatever, already having a set of beliefs about the world, and my question is whether and how I should revise them in light of the evidence and arguments I'm confronted with. So I can't start from nowhere; I start from somewhere, and then I'm looking at revising from there. And so the question then is going to be, I have all these reports of religious experience. Maybe I have some of my own. And I'm trying to figure out, in order to kind of make sense of all of that, do I need to revise the beliefs I'm starting with, and do I need to change the kind of community or tradition that I maybe started out trusting? Um, so that's the kind of question we're asking. Now, I think if you really want to make progress on this and you really want to take this seriously, I think you really ought to pay quite a lot of attention to the reports of experience of people who are in a quite different tradition from your own. And a way I might think about this is if you're considering a science that's not very mature, like the science that's trying to deal with connections between mind and brain, which is quite complicated, and kind of traditional experimental psychology is one paradigm, and like cognitive science and the computational model of the mind is another, and kind of pure neurobiology is another. And there are some people who think those are all good and they're someday going to be unified. And there are other people who think like some of them are good and the others aren't, or who are skeptical about unification. But if you're going to, so you might work within one of them and say, like, I'm doing my investigation within, within one of these. But you really ought to pay attention to the results of the experiments that the people in those other paradigms are getting, because their kind of different paradigm is going to maybe lead them to do different experiments that you might never think of that might be quite relevant, to your thing. And so I think that similarly, someone like me who's a Christian ought to pay a lot of attention to the religious experiences that are reported by people in different parts of Christianity, but also in totally different religions, and try to figure out, how should we understand this? Can we think of this as God reaching out to that person from the place where they are? Can my current theology and my current religious beliefs actually make sense of the kind of full range of phenomena? Which ones do I too have to regard as hallucinatory? Because no matter how much we trust it, we're not going to be able to say kind of, you're not going to have one coherent worldview that takes 100% of it to be veridical, right?
Sure. So how would you assess why should we trust these as opposed to not trust them? And given the fact that we do have a substantial amount of evidence in hallucinations and epilepsy and those kinds of mental phenomenon, why shouldn't that be something to cause you to rewrite your preconceived beliefs in a way that excludes the supernatural?
So, so again, I want to say, so maybe we do need to get into these other issues, which is that I don't think that you actually have to be committed to some kind of supernatural disruption of the natural causal order in order to think that these things are revealing of God. And that's because on a kind of traditional view of God, on the kind of classical view of God that I take to be supported by the contingency argument, God is kind of the ultimate foundation for all of reality.
Yeah, I
And
just want to clear. I totally agree. So, like, I would say that if I could pray to God for the stars to reorganize and say His name in the sky or whatever, He could totally just use physics and just some black
right.
holes just happened to hit them at the right time, and this was planned billions of years ago, and that would still be evidence of God. So it didn't violate anything, but the
Mhm.
fact that you were able to predict it, it was still evidence.
Right. And so that means that we can't assume from the outset that the things that have particular sorts of natural explanations, even if they're things that we kind of are inclined to regard as mental illness or drug abuse or whatever, we can't kind of assume from the outset that those aren't revealing God. We don't know. And there are, of course, like traditional Native American religions that take peyote to be revealing of God, and people claim these religious experiences in connection with LSD. I haven't tried any of that myself. The but I'm saying, from the perspective of the way this epistemological argument works, we can't assume from the outset that because that's the mechanism, therefore it can't be a real experience of God. We
Oh,
have to
absolutely.
look at like what kinds of experience are they reporting, and what's the best way of making sense of that experience.
Well, my question is more specifically, what kind of experiences could they possibly have that would be indicative of a God? Like, what like saying they saw a dead parent or something. Like, I would say that probably wasn't indicative of a god, because bereavement delusions, we know bereavement delusions affect 60% of the population. It's a huge common phenomenon of all human beings, happens at all of the different religious groups at the same rate, and they report very similar things. So I would say that this is probably explained by something in biology, full stop, no need for any kind of extant God interaction. But to be evidence of a God, it would have to be specific or unique in some way towards some particular God, or it would tell you something else that you wouldn't expect from bereavement delusion, like where grandpa buried his gold or something. Like, that would be great. But I don't see what else could the experiences be. What in principle could the experiences be that would indicate a God?
Sure. So first, I want to say, as you were pointing out earlier, there is this kind of massive underdetermination problem that for kind of anything we want to say, oh, this experience confirms this one hypothesis. Well, there's always indefinitely many hypotheses that the experience could also confirm. And again, that's why I take this to rely on this a kind of prior claim that we can build a compelling metaphysical worldview that involves God, right? And that this isn't like, so if somebody really thinks that believing in God is like believing in pink unicorns or leprechauns or something, right? I've got to make another argument first before this argument for religious experience, if that's their starting point. Because if that's how they think about this idea of God, then they're going to be kind of absolutely right to just say, yeah, obviously this is all hallucinatory, because we can always come up with crazy hypotheses, right, to explain our experience. So if it's one of the crazy ones, you're right to dismiss it. Okay, suppose you don't think it's crazy, right, but you don't already believe it's true. Then what kind of experience? Well, there's a question about kind of how experience leads to belief at all, right? And so I'd be inclined to believe in a principle of what's sometimes called phenomenal conservatism, that if that the kind of the way a belief seems to you is a sort of starting point for your reflection, right? That you kind of just take things at face value first and then look for reasons to question them later. And there are a lot of people who report experiences who say things like, I felt the presence of God. How exactly do we describe that experience? Exactly what were they feeling? Some people feel that in quite mundane circumstances. There are, I think, a lot of ritual practices are designed to stimulate those feelings. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, because similarly in sensory experience, there are a lot of things that we do on purpose to get certain kinds of sensory experience, right? Like looking out the window to see if it's raining. So the question then becomes, like, again, does it make sense to take these experiences at face value? There are also, of course, people who report literally seeing visions or dreaming dreams or whatever, and predicting that. That's what I was talking about with the kind of extraordinary experiences that might be used to interpret the ordinary ones, right? But the question is kind of, can we and should we take those experiences at face value, right? And my claim is we start out taking them at face value and look for reasons to question them, right? That's kind of my general approach to any kind of experience of the world.
Okay, and I would say, even if I like agreed with you and started doing that as well, I would still say that the evidence, even if I start a completely neutral standpoint, no preconceptions one way or the other, say God is completely reasonable belief. Um, if I look at the evidence, it seems like that can be better explained by non-God causes. So, like, if I said, what knocked the cup over? And we could say it's a leprechaun. Leprechauns are a possibility, perfectly reasonable possibility. I don't presuppose there are no leprechauns. I can say, okay, leprechaun could cause it, but it seems like the wind did it. The wind is a good explanation. There's no need to add a leprechaun there. Could a leprechaun have caused the wind that knocked over the cup? Sure, absolutely possible. But seems like if we want to go with the simpler explanation here, we can just omit the leprechaun and say this is fully explained by these phenomenon, which can be demonstrated very reliably in the human brain. Why would we go that extra step? Even if we start, like you said, of accepting at face value, it seems like we have really good reason to then reject that after the fact because of all of the evidence we have in psychology.
But what I want to say here is, of course, we can make a perfectly good explanation of my visual experience right now by just talking about my brain without talking about a computer screen or a signal being transmitted over the internet or you, right?
Sure.
So there's a question about like why my brain is doing that right now, right? And then we get to these other things. And so kind of same thing, the question is kind of, should we think that in some way this is ultimately connected up with a deeper reality? And I would say that also in the visual experience case, we can't give much more reason at this outset than it seems like that to me. Because if I don't start by assuming that my visual experience is revealing an objective external world, then I'm not ever going to get that whole story about brains and eyes and light waves and so on, right? So I start out, it seems to me like it, and then it turns out that my kind of total view of the world, as it were, kind of works better if I continue taking my experience regarding my experience as ultimately connected up with a person in another part of the world who's looking at a computer screen, kind of like my computer screen, and this sort of whole story about the transmission of information. But I could say, there's this very local story, right, about just my brain, and what's the justification for positing all that other stuff out there?
Sure, sure. Well, I would say that my hypothesis that there is other stuff was able to make predictions that I couldn't predict on my own without that. But I'd still understand like what would qualify as a falsification or a reason to reject a hypothesis. So if we just start with everything is true, whatever our initial experience is true. What would
Mhm.
it take to make it reasonable to take one of those beliefs and move them into the false category? Because to me, it would be if that's explained by a simpler phenomenon that has more evidence than the one I'm positing, then we should reject the one I'm positing and accept the simpler phenomenon with more evidence. And to me, that seems to be the case when we're talking about experiences, religious experiences.
So it depends on, like, well, what do we mean simpler and more evidence? Because again, I could say I have tons of evidence that I'm having visual experiences right now. The strongest kind of evidence you could possibly have, right? I'm having visual experiences right now. Um, here's a hypothesis. There's nothing more to the world than my experience, right? And there are kind of laws governing my experience. Maybe it happens in patterns, right? But maybe that's kind of all there is to the explanation. One experience causes another according to laws. Because of my cognitive limitations, it might be easiest for me to kind of express those laws in ways that appeal to objects other than me. But it would be simpler, certainly ontologically, to deny all those objects, right? And say, oh, there's just the regularities of my experience and nothing else. And so there's a question about, what do we mean by simpler and more evidence if we're not thinking that's the best hypothesis? And what I would say is that that's the point where we have to look at kind of how does our total picture of the world best fit together? And I would even go so far as to say that you can really only weigh up evidence within some kind of broader framework like that. Um, and so the question, again, this is where we get to the question of when we're having this argument about our kind of metaphysical picture of the world, is theism part of an attractive picture? Because I mean, I admit that naturalism is a quite nice picture in a lot of respects. I have views about what the best version of naturalism is. I didn't always agree with Graham Oppy about that in the debate, but I kind of, yeah, here's one attractive picture, and then I try to say here's why I think theism is another attractive picture, and here's some reasons why I think it's kind of better on the whole. But I really think we have to look at the interpretation of our experiences and the weighing of evidence within a broader framework, and also do some of the work of comparing frameworks and see which one makes the most sense overall.
Well, the question is more about like falsifiability here. Like if you start with the presupposition God exists and that's your worldview and it makes sense to you, what kind of experiences would you need to see to make that a possible belief that you would dismiss? What can we see that would say, oh, this religious experience, nope, it wasn't God, it was actually naturalism or something? Because to me, it seems like from the methodology you're proposing, there's no way to do that. It just seems like you think it's God's experience that makes sense to you, and there's no way you could ever come to the conclusion that no, it was really just the brain.
So first, we've mentioned underdetermination a couple of times. Part of the thing about these underdetermination worries is that Popper's falsifiability account of science doesn't really work. Because you can always add more epicycles, you can always kind of tweak the hypothesis or think that there was some kind of experimental error. There's no such thing as kind of absolute falsification. There's always a question about, in light of this evidence that doesn't quite fit, how am I going to adjust my view of the world?
Sure.
And I think you've always got options. I think there's always more than one rational way to go when faced with that. So having said that, what I would say is that it's hard to be very concrete because it's hard to describe kind of individual mystical experiences or things in language, and the kind of public experiences like engaging in rituals or liturgies tend not to be the ones that have kind of huge amounts of evidential value, right? But I do think, one, by reflection, I could come to think that the kind of theological picture was just incoherent. For another, you could have certain experiences. I mean, I think some people are rational by responding to the evils in their own lives by becoming atheists. I think some people do that rationally. I just, because of these kind of underdetermination things, I don't think everyone has to do that. But you might kind of look at your life, right, and look at the experiences that you're having and say, you know what, the view of God that I have had and the understanding of my experience of God and the world really led me to believe that that if I went through this kind of suffering, I would feel the presence of God in it. Maybe that's it, right? Because some mystics really do report kind of feeling the presence of God all the more in the midst of their suffering.
What was the guy, famous Jewish Holocaust survivor, Victor? I forgot his name. Viktor Frankl.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, about the absence of God. You mean a similar story to what I'm telling?
Yeah. He went through the suffering and it benefited his faith or something along those lines.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, some where it benefits and some have just the opposite response, right?
Yep.
And so I think perhaps you've got this kind of theology where you think that closeness to God comes through suffering, and you experience suffering and only experience alienation, right? We all have no choice but to kind of prioritize what we see with our own eyes over what other people tell us, right? We should take seriously what other people tell us most of the time, but we all have no choice but to prioritize what we see with our own eyes. Which isn't to say we never attribute hallucinations to ourselves, but we're very reluctant to do so, and rightly. And so a person who went through that kind of experience, I think, could be very rational in rejecting God as a result, depending on kind of what their prior starting point is.
Could you explain that, like, with an example? So, like, if I have, let's say we see a hoof print in the snow, and one person says it's a horse, the other person says it's a unicorn, and we want to assess the reasonability of the two belief systems. It seems to me, based on what you provided, is that if the person who believes that it's a unicorn has a coherent worldview to them, and it seems like an attractive worldview to them, they're justified in believing the unicorn. And the guy who says it's a horse, because I know horses exist, there's a horse down there, I can literally see a horse, it's most likely a horse, there's lots of this evidence, same size hoof print, that guy would be at the same level of justification as the guy with the unicorn?
Yeah, assuming that their worldviews are kind of equally coherent and equally explain the other available data and so forth. And so if we wanted to refute the unicorn belief, right? We'd have to hear a lot about this unicorn worldview and how it worked. And so we'd have to get into other arguments besides that like hoofprint thing, right? So we say, here's this hoofprint. I have a worldview where it's got to be a horse because there aren't any unicorns at all. You have a worldview where not only could it be a unicorn, but you think it is a unicorn because you think that's somehow more likely than it being a horse. So a worldview where like unicorns are quite common, more common than horses, or more common in this circumstance than horses, or whatever. Right. So now I need to hear a lot more about that worldview and start trying to point out tensions or contradictions in it, start trying to point out evidence that it can account for. And so this is just to say that like no one argument by itself should make a person be a theist or a naturalist or something else. Right. There's a whole bunch of stuff very broad that really has to be discussed here. And this whole argument from religious experience, it's only going to do anything for you if you think that that a certain sort of theism, a sort that can make sense of these religious experiences, is a view that's worth taking very seriously.
To me, that seems very counterintuitive because, from my perspective, the guy who thinks it's a unicorn who made the hoofprint in the snow is always going to have like a significantly higher burden of proof than the guy who thinks it's a horse. So, like horse, yeah, we have evidence of horses, lots of past evidence of horses, no past evidence of unicorns. So, to me, it wouldn't matter how coherent the person's worldview is. You could make, I would assume, as I am a very limited human being, not the most intelligent person ever, probably, but that person could probably construct a coherent worldview. They could be very, very intelligent and very articulate and create a worldview with lots of very big words that I don't understand and make it seem very coherent. But
Yeah.
that wouldn't add any weight to the probability it was a unicorn. I'd just be like, okay, give me extra evidence of unicorn. I need something more than just you have a coherent way to explain the stuff you see.
Well, so I think we should distinguish two things. One is whether the other person is being rational in their beliefs, and the other is whether they're giving you any reason to change yours. Because it is possible that two people can kind of rationally disagree without having provided each other any reason for change, right?
Sure.
And so is the unicorn person rational? Well, look, you appealed to all that evidence about like why we think there are all these horses and none of them seems to be unicorns. And the question is like, given that person's own experience, given the testimony they've heard from others, given what they've seen in the world, like how are they dealing with all that stuff in their unicorn worldview, right? So we just have to kind of, in terms of whether they're rational, we just have to kind of go into all of that. In the scenario you've described, they absolutely haven't given you any reason to believe in unicorns. They might, if you get into the unicorn worldview and you start hearing more about it, they might give you some reason to take that worldview more seriously than you did before, depending on how things go. But that's not going to be because of the hoofprint, right? The kind of scenario I'm imagining is the scenario where, like, suppose you both think you see a unicorn, and you say, I think I'm hallucinating, and they say, I've believed in unicorns all along, so now we just saw one, right? That's the kind of scenario I have in mind. Or a scenario where kind of you don't see it yourself, but a whole bunch of people report it, and there's not particularly good reason to think they're lying or we're on drugs or something, right? Then what do you say about that? And that's the case where I'm saying, like, you have some reason to be a bit resistant to the hallucination hypothesis, but not ultimately immovably resistant, right? So you want to ask, could they really be seeing something? Is that plausible? Is, I say, a question you should take quite seriously, but it might be at the end of the day that you answer no. And on the God case, whether you should answer yes or no is going to depend on a bunch of these other arguments about kind of how theistic and naturalistic views of the world work and hang together, and kind of how attractive each is.
So would that apply to people who study Bigfoot and the Loch Ness monster and aliens, if they already have a deeply held belief that is coherent to them that these things exist, and they see an experience that they interpret to be aliens or Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster, they're rationally justified in believing that, even given all of the empirical evidence we have against them.
Well, we're presupposing here that their kind of prior view of the world made sense and dealt with their previous evidence and so on, right? The evidence that they possess. If so, so suppose that someone rationally believes in Bigfoot. Who cares what kind of, rationality is, people can be rational without getting things right. I like to compare it to, you could be the best poker player in the world, but if you're dealt a string of bad hands, you're going to lose. Being a good poker player is about doing the best you can with the cards you're dealt. Being rational, similarly, is about doing the best you can with the kind of inputs that you have to your thought processes.
Sure.
So suppose someone has some kind of crazy background and upbringing, that's something bizarre, that leaves them with a rational belief in the real existence of Bigfoot, right? Suppose they're rational in starting out with that belief, and they do have a whole world view that makes sense around that. Then I'm going to say, yes, if they think they see Bigfoot, they should believe it. And if we want to put them in a position where they're rationally obligated to change their mind, we're going to have to bring up evidence and arguments that make that background worldview no longer make sense. And in the Bigfoot case or the alien case, I would say that should be possible. There's kind of evidence and arguments in the world to undermine it.
Could you explain that more? What do you mean by make the background worldview less rational?
Yeah. So it's just like suppose they don't even know that there are tons of zoologists and paleontologists and so forth who go out digging for fossils and cataloging animals and so forth, and none of those people have seen any evidence of Bigfoot. Suppose they don't even know that that lots of other people have gone looking for evidence of Bigfoot, and the best they've brought back is terrible. Suppose they were misled about what evidence there is in their, childhood upbringing or whatever. And so we just kind of like bring that all in and say, what are you going to do with it? Right. And the question is whether kind of after all of that, should they be convinced that, it's more likely that I didn't really see Bigfoot than that I did. And whatever other kind of explanations there are for why it might have seemed to you that you did. Right.
Would that not be exactly analogous to what we could do in the religious experience case of, like, we can say you were brought up with these facts, younger creationism, those are proven false, or there's a lot of people who've looked for religious experiences, haven't found it. There's a lot of reason to think that the religious experience you did have could be explained by a bear or a delusion of some kind. It seems like there's a one-to-one correlation we could make to the people, or to the arguments and evidence you could present to the Bigfoot person and the arguments and evidence you could present to the religious experience person. Why would there be what's the symmetry breaker between those two that makes it rational in the case of Bigfoot to reject Bigfoot, but not in the case of God or religious experience?
So I do think that that we need to follow exactly the same procedure. And I do think there is a whole bunch of counter evidence, right? Like the world doesn't look like it was created by an all-powerful benevolent being, right? Like I'm looking around and that's not what I would expect if right on this hypothesis. The plurality of religions is a bit puzzling, right? If religious experience is supposed to provide people evidence of God and God wants everybody to know and so on. So that's why I keep saying kind of no one argument can decide the case, right? And there are good arguments. I think there are good arguments against theism, and there are good arguments for theism. And we kind of have to look at the full range of arguments here. And that's why I really, really don't like fideism. Okay, I'm really not into, oh, it's just faith, don't subject it to rational criticism. As a philosopher, I'm all about subjecting beliefs to rational criticism. And I kind of really like to pay a lot of attention to the problems with my own view while also raising problems for other people's views. And so I don't, this isn't supposed to be a picture on which you can ignore all of that counter evidence, right? It's supposed to be a picture on which you have to take that counter evidence seriously. and you have to kind of do the hard work of trying to figure out, is there a total theistic worldview that kind of makes sense of all of that? And you mentioned young earth creationism. And I believed in young earth creationism when I was 19. Okay. And so I'm talking about this process of philosophy, right? Where we start with some beliefs, we subject them to rational criticism, and we change them. And I will say unequivocally, I don't think you can rationally hold young earth creationism when fully apprised of the available evidence. Okay. Some people have bad evidence, right? And they've been misled in various ways. They might be doing the best they can in the epistemic circumstances they find themselves. But I do not think you can rationally hold young earth creationism when you're fully apprised of the evidence. And actually, in terms of what kind of progress we make in this kind of thought and debate, I think it's a lot easier to kind of rule out a bunch of bad theistic worldviews and a bunch of bad atheistic worldviews than to kind of decide between the best theism and the best atheism. So I do think there are views, including views I used to hold, that we can and should rule out by the very kind of procedure you're describing.
Sure. So I think my question is more specifically, though, if we could make a one-to-one correlation argument. So if we listed out all of the reasons you think the Bigfoot person would, the counter evidence you could present against them that should make them less confident in their belief, and up to some degree where you'd say, okay, at this point, they'd probably be rational to reject Bigfoot. And if we paralleled that and showed that every single one of those arguments had a parallel argument to theism and religious experience, and we could show that they have essentially the same weight. So the weight of the arguments against Bigfoot would essentially be the exact same arguments with the exact same weight against theism. Would that cause you to reassess your belief in religious experience because they have, just like you think the Bigfoot person probably shouldn't believe because of all these reasons, and the same reasons exist against theism? Would that cause you to reduce your confidence in the religious experience case?
Absolutely. Yes. So, and again, I'm not a super confident theist. I said I don't like this, like, conceptions of faith that make beliefs held by faith immune from rational criticism, right? What I think is, like, I spend all this time on rational criticism, and I know that I kind of can't be super confident, but I have to figure out how to go out and live my life. And that's kind of how I think about faith, is that there are certain beliefs that I kind of might know I could easily be wrong about, but I still sort of rely on them in practice because I need to, for a variety of reasons. That's how I think about faith. So yes, I adjust my confidence up and down in this stuff all the time because I spend my days thinking about philosophical arguments. And but I do think one difference between the Bigfoot case and the God case, that again refers back to this argument from contingency and other things, is that in the Bigfoot case, if you start saying that Bigfoot is harder and harder to see and leaves less and less evidence behind, and at some point, so you're like, oh, I used to believe in regular giant ape Bigfoot, but now I believe in invisible weightless Bigfoot, right? Who doesn't leave footprints or anything. Bigfoot then isn't doing anything in your worldview anymore, right? Whereas the kind of classical God that serves as an ultimate explanation of why there's something rather than nothing has this kind of worldview work to do that is independent of things like young earth creationism or whatever. And so the question is, when you start adjusting your conception of God to deal with various evidence, or your broader theology and religious beliefs to deal with various evidence, one, does your overall view still make sense and hang together? And two, have you undermined all the reasons you had for believing in it? And so I think I've done a lot. I do a lot of adjusting of my view of God. I've done a lot of that over the amount of time I've been studying philosophy, and I will continue to do so, no doubt. But I think this question always has to come back to, okay, now that we've made all these adjustments, is there something important left? Or has this concept lost its purpose? And that's a thing I think happens in the Bigfoot case that, from my perspective, hasn't happened to me in the God case on the basis of the evidence and arguments that I've considered.
Gotcha. And I do want to be respectful of your time. We have been going for about an hour if you need to go. And if not, I'd love to talk about the contingency argument.
I'm afraid I do have to head out at this point, but I do really appreciate the invitation. This has been a great discussion.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on. Really enjoyed talking with you, and I will let you go. You can just close the screen anytime you want, and I'm going to start the after show.
All right. Thank you very much.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye. All right, guys. After show. How do I don't know how to do an after show on Restream. Because it gave me maybe a screen share. Is there a partial screen share? Maybe it's a partial screen share. Contain. Oh, I think I know what that does. All right. Let's go to social media. Discord. I can't use Streamlabs because Streamlabs broke. After show. Hello, Jeffy Pop. All right, let's see. Screen share. Window. Discord share. All right, so now there. Let's try that one. No, ooh, it works. I got it. All right, guys. Anybody? I should probably put the link in the thing so people can join. Hello, Digital Gnosis. How's it going? Thank you. Going to the classical one, is contingency better explained by naturalism than theism? Can we say that it's quantum fields or whatever? And is that a better position than saying it's a non-physical mind of some kind? Wouldn't we be more rational to think that it's a quantum field than something we have no evidence can happen? Oh. Yes, I can hear you.
Well, God makes it appear this way to deceive us, or something like that, and preserve the young Earth creationism belief and remain consistent. Is that in line with what he was saying sort of before I watched? Is that criticism in line with what he was saying before I kind of came in to watch the stream?
Can you say that again?
I think a more general. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, like it seemed to me towards the end when he said something. It seemed like he was holding to like a coherentist position. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
And I think you were sort of criticizing that along, like looking for this kind of like reductio idea that someone could have, a coherent set of beliefs, but we'd all say it's false, sort of thing. And he said something then that, when he said, when I was 19, I was a young Earth creationist.
Yep.
And he said, I don't think someone could remain a young Earth creationist in the face of all of the evidence that there is. And
Yeah.
I think that that's inconsistent with his position, because he should actually be committed to the idea that what someone could do is, rather than, reject young Earth creationism, they'd like, maybe they'd say, well, actually, that God's testing people. They'd form this extra belief: God's testing people's faith through like tree rings and geological records and fossils, and actually, young Earth creationism is true, but God had this desire to test people's faith in this way.
Yeah, I would totally
And then
agree. I
maybe
think that there should be some break point where some kind of evidence should be able to move you away from the probability it's true, even though due to underdeterminism, you can always make up a ad hoc way to say God's doing this for some reason to test me or whatever. And that's kind of what I was asking him about for like the last half an hour, I think, was what is the criterions that would need to be made that would make it justifiable or irrational to continue to hold a belief. And the only ones he listed was for the Bigfoot ones. He said that if we presented this evidence against Bigfoot, then they should probably not hold the belief in Bigfoot after this was presented. And that's where I said, well, so if we presented these exact same things to theism, would it still be that way? And he said, no, because God still explains the origin of the universe, which Bigfoot doesn't.
right, yeah. Which I guess, why couldn't the young Earth creationists sort of say that in the face of this evidence, which someone's suggesting they should interpret in a different way, like tree rings or whatever?
Yeah, I should have thought of that. That's a really good, it would be a really good response.
Also, why does the explanation of the origin of the universe qualify it as being like held to, whereas like just Bigfoot existing doesn't?
Well, I think the argument is that if your hypothesis explains something, like some unknown fact about the universe, then that reason is explaining that is one of the reasons you believe in the thing. So if you believe in Bigfoot to explain dark energy or something, and so even if you think of Bigfoot as an invisible spaceless or an invisible spaceless timeless thing that doesn't affect the forest, you still have this other reason to think he's there that hasn't been debunked yet. So that's to me what it sounded like, that he was saying that because it does some epistemic work, has some explanatory power of some other phenomenon, then it's reason that hasn't been debunked yet. You still have a reason to hold to that, even if there's other things about it that have been debunked.
So did he? Because I didn't hear the whole interview. Did he say that the contingency argument was really like the main reason, like the main independent reason in favor of like the God belief for him?
No, we skipped straight into the personal experience one. That one we did first because I normally do the contingency one first. So I decided to go with the personal experience, and we didn't get to the contingency. He said in his book with Graham Oppie, he brought up two arguments. The two arguments were the contingency and the personal experience, and then we got into the personal experience thing.
That's interesting. How did he give a reason why he thought that God is the cause of personal experience rather than something else, or like a better explanation, or like how did he phrase it?
Yeah, so that was most of our conversation. I was like, well, why should we believe this is personal experiences of a God and rather than delusion or whatever? And he said that he gave the classic Plantinga argument that we should accept things until demonstrated otherwise, or accept beliefs, properly basic beliefs, and that the fact that you start with the belief that God exists and he explains the data justifies that it's a rational belief to hold. And so we have to accept our preconceived or our initial sense of the experience first, and then try to find reasons to deny it. And so simply the fact that people already accept it as personal experience of a God is a reason to accept it as something you start as belief it's true until defeaters are presented.
I
Wouldn't
think I
that
think there's
leave
an
him?
interesting question. Oh, sorry. You go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, wouldn't that leave him stuck believing contradictory propositions until they're debunked?
Contradictory. I don't know. I think if
Since there can be two propositions that contradict each other, that both explain like some phenomenon, and until they're debunked, he's supposed to believe them if they're both coherent.
well, I think it's that if you hold those beliefs, then it would probably be self-defeating. But if you only hold one of those beliefs, whichever one you hold is justified, and the other one isn't because you don't hold it. So even though two people could hold two contradictory beliefs, they'd both be justified in believing it, even though one of them is necessarily wrong.
So his whole thing is just that it matters to the individual what the worldview is, and he doesn't really care about like the metaphysical ultimate truth or whatever?
No, I think we were talking about epistemology, not ontology. So he's saying that it's rational for a person to hold a belief if they already have all these preconceived beliefs, and it's a coherent worldview for them. So they believe in God, and they have this experience which is explained to them by their preconceived beliefs to be God. Therefore, they are rational to conclude it was God. And then that's
I
different
think
from
there'd
the
be something
ontology
to.
question.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think there's something to push him on here for his like coherentist position, because generally one of the main things that sort of motivates coherentism is the idea that perceptual experience, isn't it there's no like givens in terms of the content. So like if I have like something seems read to me, for example, like it doesn't have the cognitive content of like that is read or whatever. Only like a belief can justify another belief. And so this is one of the things that's sort of used to motivate the idea that we can only have like coherent webs of belief, but we can't kind of get outside them. And I think if he holds to something like that, I'd want to press him on like, what part of the experience that someone's having when they have a religious experience is it that sort of tells you that like the cause of this experience is God? If it's sort of a good feeling while you're singing a hymn, or the way that light's coming in through stained glass. I mean, is it that there isn't like this given content to that, like this is God or something? So I'd want him to sort of expand a bit more on why he's making the inference that it is and not something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I asked him that exact question, and he said the reason is because people say it's God, they feel it's God, and he said it's hard to express what the experience actually is, but because they believe it's God, that is essentially the thing that justifies it. That and the fact that it comes apart as a part of a coherent worldview.
Yeah, it's like, well, what does it mean? It feels like it's God, like what is that?
Well, that's
So
the Plantinga thing, where it's rational to hold a belief until defeaters are presented, and since it's a part of a whatever coherent worldview, and you just
Yeah.
inherently believe that this was an experience of God, well, that's good enough.
So as someone who was previously religious back in my like teens and very early 20s, yeah, I mean, I grew up heavily involved in the church, and the way they play their music and the after prayer services, it was a evangelical like faith assembly kind of church, and it brings about like these emotions and these feelings and like the chill up your spine, and they kind of have it down to a science per se. And the way they explain it, the way it's explained to you, is that's like the feeling of God. So it's like, here is this feeling, and here's the answer why you're feeling that, without any other kind of like knowledge of how you could get to there. You just kind of accept it whenever you're in that environment.
Yeah, I think the crux of his argument was the coherency of a worldview. I think that really what he's saying is that if you meet whatever criteria there is for a coherent worldview, then you're essentially just a priori rational to accept that whatever your worldview is explains whatever you experienced.
Did he say that like he also believes in psychological explanations, or like like priming or memory contamination after the fact? Because if he also has those beliefs, then they could do the work for him as well, right? Like it would still be coherent for him to explain his experience in terms of those things.
Yeah, he said that it's not a contradiction to say that all of the experiences we have could be fully explained by natural law and still be a miracle. So, like, the example I gave was like, I could pray to God to realign the stars and spell out I am God or whatever, but that could have all just been from black holes going into the correct location billions of years ago, and it spelled it out coincidentally. That would still be evidence of God. So it seemed like he was saying that even if this was explained by purely biological, mental, neurological functions, it could still be experience of a God, and he's still rational to believe it's an experience of a God because of the coherency of his worldview argument.
And would he say the reason to like overdetermine the explanation, or to overdetermine the explanation, is going to be because of the contingency argument or like other arguments in favor of God's existence?
Yeah, so he's saying is the coherency of his worldview plus the contingency argument gives justification to do that, to add that extra thing that is less simple. And he was using the analogy of the solipsism thing. Well, we can conclude there's an external world, even though the simplest explanation is that just your experience exists or whatever. And the reason is because of coherency plus this other argument about contingency and the origin of everything.
I didn't get to hear the entire conversation. Did you ever get to bring up post hoc rationalization? Because his position sounded a lot like a large defense for post hoc rationalization.
I'm not sure if it would be post hoc because it's since he starts with the belief God exists and then explains the things he sees with that belief, it wouldn't necessarily be post hoc. So I didn't bring that one up.
He did at one point mention seeing a thing and then modifying your view to account for that thing, like having new evidence presented and then changing your view to explain that new evidence. And that's where I got post hoc rationalization from. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but it sounded like a fairly clear description of post hoc rationalization to me.
I vaguely remember that, but I think it's fine to change your belief with new evidence. That's not. I don't think that would be post hoc. It's the hoc part is the post, but it's not hoc. So it's perfectly rational to, when you're presented with new evidence, change your beliefs. And I think that's what he was talking about. Not that he was using post hoc reasoning to just say, here's something I don't understand. Ah, God did it. Thank you for the super chat, Padawan Fef. DA. I don't know what DA means. DA, semicolon, if every law needs a lawgiver, does it not make sense to say a moral law needs a moral lawgiver? What's your thoughts? I mean, if every law needed a lawgiver, then that would be a fine argument, I would guess, because if moral laws would also be a category of laws, and then possibly if every law needs a lawgiver, does every moral law need a moral lawgiver? I think that would make sense. That would make sense as an argument if the first case was true.
DA stands for Devil's Advocate.
Ah,
Ex-Catholic.
Got it. Thought it stood for dat ass.
Ayo.
Anybody else got any questions, comments, interesting things they're doing? What do you do up to, Digital Gnosis? Any new shows coming up?
I'm literally just about to go to jiu-jitsu, but in terms of streams, oh yeah, on Friday, it'll be Friday in America as well. Did you see that? If you saw, anyone saw that Skydive Phil documentary on the Kalam with Alex Malpass, Ari Falkmed, Booth and Valenkin and all those people, sort of that Craig responded to. James, Fodor, and I are both going to be interviewing Skydive Phil on Craig's response that he did to that documentary this Friday, so people might take an interest in that. And then, other than that, I've not got anything that interesting planned for a while, I don't think.
Yeah, I really like that Skydive Phil review of Craig's argument, except at the end where they said, what was it? Causality isn't a thing or whatever. I think that was the one that just, there is no causality. I mean, that part I think is a stretch. I think it's a bad way to phrase it that makes the argument sound weaker. But other than that, I liked most of the responses they had.
Yeah, I think it was a really good documentary as well, just in terms of a lot of the people that Craig likes to cite as well that are in the documentary, talking about how sort of Craig either overstates what they say or takes it kind of out of context, or doesn't go far enough, and it becomes quite clear the sort of the amount of fringe positions that you need to take in order to get Craig's. Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, I love the Valenkin saying
right?
that,
On like cosmology.
Valenkin was just saying, yeah, the BGV doesn't say that there's a beginning to the universe. It says it's just the inflation had a beginning. That was great.
Right. But Craig's got his intuitions. Okay, well, I'm going to listen to the start bit of your interview while I go for a walk, so I'll see you around, Tom. But
See ya. Talk to you later.
later.
So I was wondering if he was the Pine Creek theorem applies to him, and
I
why
don't
he
know.
was able to like reject
I didn't ask
younger
about his
hope.
wife, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, Pine Creek would have asked him. But yeah, he basically seemed to say like most religion was wrong because of psychology and evolution. And then he's like, well, except for mine.
I don't know. I think it'd be more. I think he'd probably say that they're all also justified in believing their God. So, because his argument was epistemology, not ontology. He wasn't saying that God was true. He was saying that it was rational to believe in God because of these reasons, and which would also include that it would be rational for all the other religions to also believe in God for those reasons. So that would be a good question to ask him, like what Digital Gnosis said of, would there be a difference? Are some of the other religions unjustified, even though they also have the same criterion of they think God explains the origin of the universe or whatever, based on some set of facts? And if so, why don't those same set of facts apply to your religion?
Yeah, at some point, I can't remember the exact question, but you'd asked him about, people that believe in Bigfoot, are they rationally
Justified, yeah.
justified? And he agreed. He was like, yeah, according for their worldview, yes.
Yep. That's definitely a hard point on disagreement of, I don't think that the coherency of a worldview can in any way justify belief in it without some kind of independent methodology. Because like I said, I think if you're smart enough, you can always construct a coherent worldview of just anything, Bigfoot, UFOs, whatever. And for it to be justified, you need more than just your ability to make a coherent explanation.
My problem is it doesn't do anything like for you to just be like, well, here's an answer, but I come from a spot where it's like, I guess if you're not sure or if it doesn't like provide any extra answers for you, that I'm trying to figure out how to like word this, that you can justify in some way. I don't know. It's just finding an answer to something out of convenience, but not out of evidence. Like, out of the gaps, I guess.
Are you describing Occam's razor?
That was a question for the guy just speaking, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, no, I wasn't talking about Occam's razor. I don't think Occam's razor is good at all, just because it's a kind of false dichotomy.
Okay.
False dichotomy.
The way that people present it usually. Oh wait, no, I'm thinking of something else. My bad.
Occam's razor is just
Occam's
that
razor.
we should not posit more entities than necessary.
Yeah, I was thinking of I mixed them up. The one where it's like you should believe in God because otherwise you go to hell or whatever.
Pascal's wager.
Yeah, my bad.
Wager and razor are very similar sounding words, so I can understand that.
And that's why I had a wager with my enemy's balls.
So oftentimes the simplest one, right? And that's, well, to answer your question, no, that's not what I was talking about.
Yeah.
My main issue with Pascal's wager is it fails to mention that over 4,000 religions exist. So if you like add that into the denominator, it makes it like a starting chance of 0.02%.
Yeah, that's what I meant by false dichotomy. It's like it's not like one or the other. It's not Christianity or
Right.
not Christianity.
And it's like, how do you know that like rejecting the Norse god is like worse or better than like rejecting Christianity.
I like Pine Creek's answer on this subject, where he goes like, what if God does not want to be believed in? What if he is so powerful that he doesn't care whether people believe in or not or not? And what if and what if like belief in the God is what sends you to hell?
He stole that from me.
Um,
That is my argument. Pine Creek stole that argument from TJump. It's a TJump argument that I brought up in my conversation with what's her name? The expert in Pascal's wager. L starts with an L.
Liz
Liz
Jackson.
Jackson. That's right. So yeah, I made the argument that it's equally as likely that belief in God will get you into heaven as it will in hell, because it's equally probable there's a God who will put you in heaven for believing as one who won't, and one who'll put you in heaven for eating a jelly donut or picking your nose on a Tuesday. And there's equally as much probability for a God sending you to heaven or hell for any of those particular actions. Therefore, the probability is exactly the same for all of them. It's my argument.
yeah,
Pine Creek stole it from
yeah,
me.
I like
yeah.
you, TJump, but I swear I heard Matt Dillahunty say something like that 10 years ago on the Atheist Experience.
That's pretty common.
Pine Creek, more like Pine Thief.
Yes, Pine Thief. Doug is a word thief.
Yeah, and like I guess you stole it from Matt Dillahunty, so T-Jump more like T-Jump suit.
This is why I have like exclusive rights to print pine points, so I can give pine points out. It's because he steals all my arguments.
What has been your favorite? What you feel like has been the most productive debate that you've had recently?
Well, recently there was 2 this week that went really well. One with Ashley Keaton and one with Randall Grasso. Those are both really productive. This one was pretty interesting. I think he was more long-winded than I would have liked. I wish he could have answered more specifically the questions, because there was a few of them that he didn't really answer. Like when I asked, do our personal experiences map onto a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, necessary being who doesn't change? I definitely wish he would have answered that one, because he kind of moved on to a different topic. I don't think it was intentional though.
Yeah, to be fair, he did say in the very beginning that he was not good at debating. And
Yep.
Part of that comes with being able to say your point fast.
Yep.
TJump, what's your view, Tom? What's your view on objective morality?
Objective morality. I believe there is objective morality.
Oh yeah, I did
And
see that. I wanted to ask you about that actually.
yeah, what is the origin for objective morality in your opinion?
Undiscovered emergent law of physics.
So you believe that there is something in the universe that defines morality,
Yes.
which has not been discovered?
Yes.
And what's your evidence to this claim?
I don't have any. It's a hypothesis. My proposed prediction is that we will find the patterns of morality in all forms of intelligent life throughout the universe. And so if we discovered other forms of intelligence and we get artificial intelligence, and they discover the same kinds of moral principles that we believe are correct, that would be evidence that morality is a result of something more fundamental than social stuff.
So is the premise of your argument that because humans have shared morality, there must be some force that causes objective morality into being?
Sort of moral progress, that humans share morality and it changes in the same ways, in the same patterns in all cultures, and it's other species as well, other animals, same patterns.
What about
But I don't,
different cultures that have different like
patterns.
sets of morality?
Still have the same patterns.
What pattern? Name any one pattern which you find as a shared piece of objective morality between multiple cultures.
Don't kill, don't steal, don't rape, eliminating slavery, rights of people who are weaker, like poor, homeless. As technology and resources increase in every society, their scope of morality increases in every society. So women's rights in the Middle East are now also being increased, even though their subjective moral framework of their religious belief is directly opposed to women's rights because they are technologically increasing. If there is the subjective morality, that would explain why they are giving more rights to women, even though it's directly opposed to their socially constructed view of morality.
I feel that this, in my personal opinion, I do not agree with the argument posed over here. I think historically there have been civilizations that were completely okay with rape, murder, or any sort of the horrible activities you've mentioned. And I would also argue that um, the Middle East, to, parts of the Middle East that are changing in the positive direction. So parts of the Middle East have been changing very, very negatively, like Iran and Iraq, but also the changes that are occurring positively in the Middle East, which also seems like to be very cherry picked in and of itself, because like certain places like Turkey are denigrating in their rights, but Turkey's not really. Um, anyway, my point is that I think that you're not factoring in global influence into the Middle East, which is causing the rights of certain individuals in the Middle East to rise. And I think you're just stating a magical force in the air as your answer to objective morality. I feel like it's not nuanced enough and is not looking holistically at the evidence presented.
So I'm accounting for all of those things. So as I said, the principle says that as we gain in technology and resources, that's what causes the change in morality. So the further back you go with less technology and less resources, the more immoral the society is going to be, the more okay they are going to be with rape and murder and things. So as they gain in technology and resources, then they start to see less and less tolerance towards these things. And that's the pattern that we see, not just that everyone's always intolerant at all times. And there
So
are
my
obviously certain cases that go against that during certain times, but the overall trend is the same.
I feel that this is correlation and not causation as a whole. Um,
Science
yeah,
can't prove
that's all I can
causation,
say.
so I mean we can never prove causation.
But we can prove causation, and we do objectively prove causation because we tend to reason based. So if you wanted to prove that technological improvements are the reason for improvement in human structure, you would have to argue that which technological improvements are causing the improvements in social lifestyles, and you would also have to like form links. I don't get I don't get what the whole argument of it's impossible to prove causation comes from.
It's a fact of science. So all scientists admit you can't prove causation. It could all just be correlation. The whole, like Hume specifically wrote on that, all causation could just be a figment of our imagination. It's all just random. So we can never prove causation in science. It's just we infer causation. We infer that it's causal, but we can't ever prove causation.
Are you familiar with the Kardashev scale?
Yes, I'm familiar with the Kardashian. Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunate.
Well, so like as like a civilization of a world would approach, the higher types of civilization that it describes, then the pattern would all kind of eventually each civilization approaching that would achieve the same morality. Is that what you're saying, TJump?
What? I was not listening. So I think that yes, once we gain sufficient technology, every society, regardless of where they are in the universe, will all converge on the same morality.
Okay.
I do agree that like okay, Jeffy, go ahead.
I was just going to ask. I've heard TJump talk about the extraterrestrial discoveries in his objective morality, but would convergent evolution not also be weak evidence for your position?
Convergent evolution? I'm not sure what you mean.
So some traits are divergent when they're evolved, between different groups of animals. But there are some traits that have evolved convergently. So like flight, for example, has evolved in insects separate from mammals, separate from birds, and I think there's some others, and also light sensitivity evolved convergently. It evolved in separate lineages because of its usefulness. If we saw morality evolve in two unrelated groups of animals, such as like non-mammals evolving towards morality, wouldn't that also be weak evidence for your position?
Possibly, sure. So I would definitely include the fact that in evolution, the spectrum of evolution, they're all having the same moral pattern would definitely be evidence that I would consider for my model. Yes.
Again, so you do agree that causation exists to a certain degree and is reliable as a source of proof, at least to a certain degree.
I think causation exists. Yes. I don't think we could prove it, causation ever.
If I push a rock, the rock moves. I don't get it. Because I push the rock moves.
Yeah. I don't know what it could just be the case that a magical leprechaun moved the rock at the same time. You could never prove causation.
You can never prove that it's going to happen again in the future necessarily.
Yeah, I repeatedly push a rock 100 different times, and it moves every one of those 100 different times in completely different areas, in completely different time zones, in completely different environments,
Right.
and I murder every leprechaun on the earth and every invisible entity on earth.
Right, but that could also just be random chance. There could just be random leprechauns messing with you and doing it. You can never prove causation.
You assume it's a law because enough observation, but you can never prove it definitively about the future.
I mean, I feel like now we're going to end up having, I think that this discussion will end up forwarding to a English discussion. Yeah, I will agree with you that it's impossible to prove anything or say anything with 100% confidence. However, I think I would argue that it's on a probabilistic scale.
Sure.
I can sufficiently argue that causation can be inferred.
Right. I agree. So I said that earlier. We infer causation, but we never prove causation. So we infer it's causal. So I am inferring that the cause of this pattern in morality is caused by this undiscovered law of nature.
Yeah, I mean, like, so in your description, so you've used multiple different phrases, and I'm kind of like trying to narrow it down. So right now you use the phrase law of nature, but earlier you said a invisible force that's present. So do you believe that this is a law of nature or a force that is present? Like, do you believe that?
Same thing. So I think that a law is something that describes a force. So like the law of gravity describes a force, which is gravity. I think those are synonymous terms.
Yeah. Yeah, but the law of parsimony, for example, does not describe a force of parsimony. Like laws need, yes, in the example you've presented, the law of gravity or is existent as a force, but not every law necessarily is a force that's present.
Well, I'm talking about in physics. So in physics, there are laws that are all forces, pretty much. So when I use law, I mean force. I don't ever mean constructed legal sense.
I have a somewhat related question if you're
Go
done,
for it.
River Snow.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna say that it just feels like an extra entity is being created without adequate proof, but that's just my perception of this argument.
Well,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
agree. It's just a hypothesis, so I can't prove it. So it is definitely an extra entity that I am hypothesizing, and I'm hypothesizing that if this is the case, we'll find evidence for it in the future.
Okay. I can live with that.
So would you say that if B is dependent on A and A is not dependent on B, we can assume that A is more fundamental than B? Like, for example, if all cases of morality we see, it's dependent on consciousness. We don't see any morality without consciousness, or we see consciousness without morality. Does that make consciousness more fundamental in any sense?
No, I don't. That doesn't make sense. Like, we don't see other universes without telescopes. Does that mean telescopes are more fundamental than other universes or other galaxies? Well, no. So I
Yeah,
don't.
that's sort of the example I was thinking about. Because that is still dependent on consciousness. That observation, it's still only reduced to consciousness, even through telescopes.
I don't think that matters to the argument. So the argument is that if something is required to see or experience something else, is the first thing more fundamental than the second thing? And I'd say no.
So can you think of an example of something that's be dependent on A, but not vice versa?
Yes, it is dependent on the telescopes to be able to see other galaxies, but other galaxies existing is not dependent on us seeing them through telescopes.
But they're both still dependent on consciousness.
That doesn't matter at all to the argument.
So here you give one instance of observation and you say that specific observation is dependent on telescopes. But the argument for consciousness and matter is different because all observation, any observation,
It doesn't. That
matter
doesn't. That
is
doesn't matter.
dependent on
Again, so the
consciousness.
structure of the argument is flawed. The validity is the problem here, not the soundness. So the validity, which says any object X, which can only be interacted with through object Y, proves that object X is more fundamental than Y. That's false. So I can give an example. The object X, which can only be interacted with through telescopes, is other galaxies. We can only see other galaxies through other telescopes. Does that prove that object X is more fundamental than Y, or vice versa? No. The fact that we can only see things through telescopes doesn't prove that telescopes are fundamentally more fundamental than the things we see in them. So the structure of your argument is wrong if that you presuppose that because we only see something as interaction with something else, that they must necessarily be in that order ontologically. It's not the case.
Okay.
Tom, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
So I was watching The Line with Matt Dillahunty
Sure.
yesterday, and he said something about trans rights or whatever. So I guess my question to you is, should a trans person have to tell their significant other that they're trans? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes. I would say that
Because
if you're in a relationship and in that relationship you agree to be honest with one another and the person wants to know if you're trans and you don't tell them, then yes, it would be immoral not to tell them if that was one of the things you agreed upon in the relationship.
I would just say, like, when they have to know it, especially like if you're trying to have kids, at that point, like, very important for them to know. So, but he said that they shouldn't have to tell them. So I was just wondering what you thought about it.
It would depend on the terms of the relationship. If the relationship was constructed in that they agreed to be honest with one another and someone violated that agreement, then they would be immoral. So if they didn't say that, and if they were in a relationship and they agreed that they don't need to be honest with one another and they don't expect to be honest in all important cases, then it would be fine. Like, monogamy is the same thing. Like, if you're in a relationship and you both expect or have agreed to be monogamous and somebody cheats, that's immoral. But if you have agreed to an open relationship, then it wouldn't be. So if you're in a relationship where you have agreed to be honest with one another in all cases, then it would be immoral to hide that or to lie about that.
Based on.
Yep. Huh.
Did somebody call me?
I don't know.
Okay.
Restream is not bad. It's got some decent options to it that are usable. Captions. Move that one. Nope.
Appreciate the discussion, guys.
Thanks.
If I watched the same clip that guy was talking about, I think that the Matt Dillahunty question was specifically is the impetus on the trans person to reveal that at the beginning of the relationship, not after anything had been agreed upon, and that's what Matt Dillahunty was saying. No, they don't. That's not like something they need to just reveal on the outset.
If they were asked, I think they would have to reveal it. If they were not asked, then no.
I've heard
Probably
like
not.
the argument come from the point of view where it's like, at what level are they obligated to like disclose? Someone might be upset if like a trans person flirted with them. So is the obligation on the trans person before they even engage, go up to someone and tell them that they're trans?
No, definitely not. But
In my opinion, the impetus is on the person who has a problem with it to say that they have a problem with it, not on the trans person. But that's just my position.
like if they were asked, like if someone asked, "Are you trans?" or whatever, you should probably tell them the truth. And if like the goal is to have an honest relationship, but I don't think you'd be obligated to just if someone started speaking to you, "Oh, by the way, I'm trans." I don't think that would be inherently required. But I mean, at the same time, there are also legal requirements. So, like, in order to donate blood or plasma or anything, one of the things on the questions is, have you had any sexual contact with another male? And if you say yes to that, you can get deferred and lose money. So at the same time, yes, you do. There is an obligation that you have to tell people that, because there are legal consequences if you don't.
Well, personally, I think you have the right to know. I mean, if you're going to be in a relationship with somebody or even just talk to them, then like, wouldn't it be something that they should tell you right away? Like, hey, by the way, I mean, if you're not really sure if they are trans or not, I mean, if you ask a girl that, they're probably going to be offended by it. So
I think it would
It'd be
only
weird,
matter
like-
if you like were trying to be in a physical relationship, like an intimate relationship. Then probably trans people should be obligated to tell their partner.
I think it would just be weird if you were like
Yeah,
weeks or months into a relationship and you didn't know this fact about someone.
Sure,
a bizarre
but
scenario.
so I mean, there's like levels of relationship, right? Like you don't walk up to someone and say, "Hi, my name is John Doe. Let me give you my full background of everything that you might possibly want to know about me before." I mean, things just come up organically. You don't have to put that into your introduction. I'd say before you have any kind of like reach the level of like a physical, relationship, then yeah, you should probably bring it up by then. But there's not like a, during the handshake. I'm everything that defines me.
Right. So I don't think you should have to tell them again unless you're trying to get into an intimate relationship. Like if you're just being friends, then no one cares. It's not really a big deal at that point. You're trying to get into bed with them, probably they should tell you that. Odin Thorson, thank you for the super chat, $5. What did you think of Kenneth reframing your hoof print in the snow hypothetical into a bunch of eyewitnesses of unicorns. I think that's fine. I think like adding that in is a fair analogy, a fair thing to bring into the analogy, because there's lots of people who think they've seen God. So if there's a lot of people who think they've seen unicorns, then that would be a fine thing to add to the analogy. I still don't think it would be reasonable to believe it was unicorns, though. But I think it's rational for him to add that in. Jacob McKenzie, thank you for the super chat. If we claim to have fellowship with the chair and yet walk in darkness, we lie and don't live the truth. Give Tom all your money. Timothy 1, 2, and 3. I love it. We need to like make these into an actual document that we can sell. Graphics.
So I don't think the telescopes is a really good example, TJump, if you don't mind.
Okay, why is that?
So we know how telescope works. We know that they just enlarge or make the distance shorter in a way. So it's not like galaxies are dependent on the telescope. They're just
Right.
dependent on distance because we know how telescope works.
Right.
With consciousness and observation, it's matter. It's different.
Well, right. So the point here is that if the structure of your argument was good evidence, then we should be able to apply it to any case. And since we can apply it to some cases and show it doesn't work, that means the structure of your argument isn't good evidence.
But with a telescope, it's not working because you can't say that galaxies are dependent on
That's the point.
telescopes
So that means that
unless
your
you
argument
use-
can't be used to show anything is dependent on anything else, because it can't differentiate the ones where it is and the ones where it isn't.
I might have to think about that. Can you say that again in a different way?
Okay, so if I say the grass is wet, and when it rains, the grass is wet, therefore it rained. And I can say this argument is good evidence that it rained. And someone else could be like, no, because there are other ways that the grass can be wet. Someone could have peed on it or used their hose. So the fact that sometimes the grass becomes wet when it rains doesn't imply that your argument, which uses that as a premise, is evidence that it rained, because there are other ways to explain the argument. So if you have an argument that the structure of the argument is we only see Y preceded by X, therefore X must be more fundamental than Y, and I can give you an example where that same argument is wrong, that shows that argument isn't evidence for the case. So I can say, you use the argument that the grass is wet, therefore it rained. I can be like, well, no, it could have been caused by a hose. And that proves that that argument doesn't work. So my goal with the telescope example is to show that your argument that because we need X to experience Y, therefore X is more fundamental than Y, is an invalid argument.
It's not that we need it to experience Y.
It's more fundamental.
Every observation we have of matter is only through consciousness.
Every observation we have of galaxies is only through telescopes. Does that mean telescopes are more fundamental than galaxies?
No, because we know how that mechanism works.
Right.
We know how telescope works.
So the
to say that it's
structure of your
dependent on
argument.
it would
So,
be
so the structure of your argument that if we need X to see Y, X is more fundamental than Y, that the whole structure is proven false, because we know that that structure is wrong.
Yeah, but the telescope is the eye.
No, that's literally irrelevant. So again, we're talking about the structure of the argument. The content literally doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems very different to me. Like saying, giving the telescope example. Sorry?
So, Itai,
It's the point is that if the argument were any good because of the way it was stated, then it would mean that you should accept that the telescope is more fundamental because you can put it in the exact same format. You know that that's not true. And since there are cases where you know it's not true, you can know that the format of the statement doesn't mean that what you're saying is evidenced at all. That's all he's saying.
Yeah, I understand that. That I just think that in the telescope example, we clearly know that its galaxies are
It's
not dependent.
arbitrary. It doesn't matter. That's
So
the
can you think
reason
of an
you don't
example
accept it.
that would match it?
No, it
Like
doesn't. It does
where we
match it.
don't know, where we know
It
that it's
does
dependent?
match it.
Okay.
It's just the format. That's
Saying
all he's saying.
Yeah, maybe I'm missing something very obvious here. Sorry. That's okay.
Yeah. The entire point is, if it worked that way, if it was the case that simply because we needed one thing in order to view another thing, right? That the one thing we needed prior was more fundamental. If that was the case, then it would work. But we can think of at least one example where it isn't the case, and probably many more. So that means that it is not evidence that in anything that fits in this format means that something is more fundamental than the other thing.
Yeah, I see.
It's because you understand more about it that you reject it.
But aren't part of the consideration of, say, galaxies in the universe what they actually are relevant to the telescope? Meaning, you even if they're there, you wouldn't know what they were without the telescope.
That's the fact of how it works, but the problem with the argument is the structure of the argument. The nouns literally don't matter. So if it's saying to interact with X, you need Y. Y is more fundamental than X. Now, if anything you put in for X and Y, if there's any case where it's false, then the argument, the structure of that argument is proven false. So I need to give just any example that doesn't work.
False. It would be true.
So if the argument is you need X to see Y.
Not be aware of something without consciousness. That
consciousness doesn't matter. Get rid of consciousness. X and Y. If I can give any example of X not needing Y, the whole argument fails for every single case, including consciousness.
But you can't Y without the X. That's the point.
Right. So we can't see other galaxies without telescopes. Does that make it reasonable to say that other telescopes are more fundamental than other galaxies? No.
But but that's post hoc arguing at that point.
No.
Without the telescope, you aren't even aware that galaxies are there.
Right.
They may well not be. You view them. I mean, theoretically.
So you're confusing epistemology and ontology. The question is does the fact we need one thing to see the other thing mean that the one thing is ontologically more fundamental in reality? No. The fact that we epistemically need the first thing to see the second thing doesn't mean the first thing is more fundamental in reality. Like I need my consciousness to see rocks, but rocks existed way before I did. Rocks are more fundamental than my consciousness is.
How do you know that? That's the point.
All of science, the entire field of science.
See the second atom.
You're sort of assuming the question here.
This is just an example to show that this argument is fallacious. Like, if it's suppose materialism is true, just hypothetically, if materialism is true, then rocks existed more fundamentally than consciousnesses. Now, I can't see rocks unless I'm conscious. That means that the fact that I see it and I need to see it through consciousness isn't evidence that rocks are more fundamental, because it's just false. So the fact that we if we assume materialism is true, we know for a fact that argument fails. 100%. That argument completely fails, and there's no logical problem with this. There's no like contradiction in the universe with materialism being true and consciousness being required to experience the material stuff. That's perfectly rational. So the fact that you need consciousness to experience stuff is not evidence that the consciousness is more fundamental than the stuff you are experiencing.
Yeah, I was thinking about more of when we originally talked about it, I don't know if you remember, as a reason why to assume it, not as a proof or in any sense. If there's any reason to pose that fundamental might be that consciousness might be more fundamental.
Yes, so this would not be a reason. That's because it's the same fallacious structure that doesn't work. It's affirming the consequent fallacy.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it more. Thanks for engaging, though. It's very interesting to get your take on it.
Yep, I'm pretty sure it's literally just an affirming the consequent fallacy. So before this, therefore, because of this, or something. I forget what the exact structure is, but it's affirming the consequent fallacy. Google it, and then it should pop up.
Yeah, it's just P implies Q, Q therefore P.
Yep.
That's the affirming the consequent fallacy.
If I may ask a question, but I think you covered this recently, TJump, so feel free not to answer because I just missed it. I'd love to hear a quick rehash of your thoughts on what reality is and what your hypothesis is for it being objective. I'm sorry if that's just a boring repeat for you.
What reality is? I think it's
morality.
Morality. Yeah, I think morality is a higher order emergent law of nature. So like space-time is an emergent law of nature, field of some kind. I think that morality is a similar field of nature, just like gravity. It affects our brains.
So you're actually positing it to be a field in the scientific physics sense.
Yep.
So it would come with perhaps some force carrier, a boson, a fermion. There would be associated particles with this reality.
Yep.
And it would cover energy. And in that case, are you talking about something that is completely separate and completely unrelated to our psychological, sociological verbiage understandings of morality?
No, I'm saying it's the precursors that causes all of those things.
So are we somehow perhaps interacting with that field in our brains or something in order to come to moral conclusions?
Yes, sort of. More like our brains interacted with that field as they evolved, which led to our moral conclusions. So it's
can
not
you
like,
give me an example? Yep, sorry, go ahead.
it wouldn't be like when you think about murder, your brain is interacting with the field. It's more like the field guides how brains evolve, which leads to these conclusions.
Could you give an example of any other field that you think guided the brain to evolve to a very specific paradigm? Like we have the electric field, the magnetic field, and so on. We don't usually link those to psychological paradigms of phenomenal experience.
Well, so all of them worked together to come up with all of our current paradigms. Like there is an external world, that's one. Logic, 1 + 1 = 2, that's another paradigm that we got evolved from these fields. All of the different ones that are essentially fundamental. I exist. There are other minds. All of the things that we think are results of evolution and how the fields affected our evolutionary brains.
Yep, I agree completely, but they're results of the foundational interaction. I wouldn't say that logic comes from a logic field or that awareness of others comes from an awareness field. But here we are jumping from the foundational structure of the universe provides the boundaries on how physics works and thus how evolution happens.
Well, also like numbers. I don't think numbers are anywhere in the universe, but I think that they do accurately describe the fundamental nature of reality.
I agree with you, but we don't think that there's a number field and that shaped our understanding, right? We say that there is reality and that is those apply the boundary conditions for how we can evolve.
Wait, so that's just seems confusing. So I agree there isn't like a number field, but numbers do describe a fundamental nature of reality.
I agree.
Okay, so morality describes some fundamental nature of reality, and the question is what?
I don't agree, but I am willing to hypothesize that morality represents some fundamental nature of reality. Let's say we agree on that.
Right.
If
So
I don't need to jump from numbers, which are descriptive, to having a field, why do I jump from morality, which is descriptive, to having a field?
because it would, if it's consistent across all different species, that would be evidence that it was caused by something more fundamental than social constructs.
So do you think that numbers are consistent across species?
Yes,
But you still don't think that that requires a number field?
it does. It requires reality to have a particular nature to it. It does require a thing in reality to cause this.
I agree with you, but does it require
They're
it to
different.
be
They're
a
different
field?
things. So the thing in reality, a particular one, doesn't matter here. There is a thing in reality which causes this phenomenon.
Yes.
I think the thing in morality is a field. Not numbers aren't things. Numbers describe the way nature is.
Okay. Why is it? Why? What leads you to the conclusion that it's a field?
It's just a hypothesis. So it's not a
So you
conclusion.
know
It's a
it's something.
hypothesis. Yes.
Why does it lead you to hypothesize that it's a field as opposed to anything else? For instance, the interconnectedness of reality, the interconnectedness of fields that give rise to things like numbers.
Because the interconnectedness of the fields we know about wouldn't explain why morality would be the same across all species. So if it wouldn't explain that, we need something that would. So we need some phenomenon that would explain why this is the same in all species. And that would be a different thing.
I mean,
I have to admit
don't
that
most
I'm a
people
bit
just think
lost.
it's an effect of natural selection in social species?
Right. And that's what I said would be false. If there are other species in other universes or other galaxies that have the same patterns, then that would prove that false.
Or it would show that there's another mechanism.
How would that
right?
prove
That
that
they may be
false?
that there might be a convergent evolution. There's still many answers.
No,
to
so like AIs, no evolution. Same things, can't be evolution. Cannot be anything related to evolution because it's not evolutionary. Problem solved. That would prove evolution off the table as being the explanation.
No, I accept that. If a species comes to a certain morality without having evolved, right?
Yep.
Then whatever gives rise to morality is obviously going to be
Outside of evolution.
processed in a different way, outside of evolution. I'm completely fine with that. But that doesn't relegate it to being, therefore, the hypothesis is a field, right?
Sure, you can posit whatever you want as a hypothesis. I think it's a field. I think it's going to be discovered as some fundamental part of reality, which is best described as a field.
So you think it's going to be some kind of map of space-time, and every point in it is going to be a
Space-time
tensor
is just
or a
one
value?
kind of a field. It's just one kind of a field. So yes, it's going to be something like a field.
Space-time isn't a field, not in the sense that we're talking about physical fields. Fields are the electric field, magnetic field, and
Those
so
are
on.
different kinds of
Space-time,
fields. Those are all just different kinds of fields.
it's a manifold. I don't think space-time is accurately described as a field. I'd love it if, please do, link me to where you might get that concept from, because we have classical space-time and quantum space-time, and neither of them are shown to be a field. Quantum space-time we don't understand. But I have a physics background. I haven't heard it stated that space-time is considered a field. We can name the fields. We can name what properties fields have, why we postulate them. We know that
It's
they give
literally
rise
just
to
a gravitational field. So space-time field, the space-time field, just Google the word space-time field. As this discovery that space-time geometry is nothing but a manifestation of a particular physical field, the gravitational field. It's literally field. Like, why are you wasting my time on this?
I apologize. I'm not trying to waste your time. I Googled it, and the first result that I get is that it's a manifold, it's a model, and it isn't related to a field. But I'm looking through, for instance, Wiki now to see whether or not I
Google
can get any
space-time
reference to
field.
that.
Just Google the word space-time space field.
Space-time field. Honestly, first result, happy to share it. Physics, space-time is any mathematical model which fuses the 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time into a single 4-dimensional manifold.
Okay, I just Googled it. Space-time field as the discovery that space-time geometry is nothing but a manifestation of a particular physical field, the gravitational field. If you want to go into particular language gibberish, I don't care. There's your answer. ScienceDirect.com. Problem solved.
ScienceDirect.com. Would you mind? Only if you wouldn't mind, because I can't seem to.
I don't know how to.
But you don't have to. If this is bothering you, that's fine. I was interested in piecing out your thoughts on it because I didn't understand whether you meant field in a very specific sense or in a more general colloquial sense, and what is getting you to the interpretation field above any other interpretation.
Field is just another word for some fundamental part of reality. So what do we currently know are the most fundamental parts of reality? Fields.
I wouldn't personally, you see, I wouldn't agree with that. Field is one type of fundamental part of reality. You can't they aren't synonymous, fundamental part of reality and field. And fields have very specific properties. Fields aren't things that can just be
That's literally
associated
what I
with
just
you.
said. So yes, they are one of the kinds of things that are the most fundamental part of reality. I don't really know what the other ones are. Energy.
Okay, so that's fine. I'm honestly not trying to argue. So you feel that it's fundamental. The big category that you could pick there is field. You've picked that category in order to put it into something fundamental to be talked about.
Sure. If there are other kinds of fundamental things, those would also be categories that we would be potential explorations. Sure.
I understand. Okay. And your reason for thinking that it's fundamental is that if we see morality popping
If we
up
see
in
the
different
same
parts
pattern universally, then it's some pattern universally.
Yes. I agree. And the reason that it's a pattern universally has to be directly tied to the fundamental. It can't be an emergent property where the fundamental coalesces together, results in certain processes, results in certain patterns, and then those patterns emerge to have something consistent across the universe. You think that consistency can't come from any emergence. It has to come from
That would be the same thing. So an emergent field would be the same thing. Either one are possible. There's no difference there.
Well, I would postulate that it could be that the fundamentals come together so that at a certain granularity, at a certain point in, for instance,
obviously that's the case. Even if there is a moral field, it can do nothing without all of the other fields producing brains. So obviously that would still be true, even if I was right.
You're saying, yeah. So you're saying, for instance, that you would accept the concept that, for instance, let's take Big Bang cosmology. Big Bang happened, and at a certain point, this, for want of a better word, field coalesced.
Sure.
And gave rise to other things.
Sure.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to ask this actually goes to the conversation previously about the telescope analogy. I promise you, I'm not trying to annoy you. What do you mean by fundamental?
A part of the fundamental nature of reality. I don't know what the best way to describe that is. A thing that is an innate part of the reality.
An innate. Okay. You see, that's probably why there's this confusion for me. For me, fundamental is not just innate, but also basic building block, like lowest level, lowest granularity.
So either one of those is fine for me. Like when I say space-time is emergent as a field, I'd still call space-time a fundamental field. So there's some variability there, and it really makes no difference to my argument as long as it's close enough to the fundamental level. Doesn't need to be the most fundamental thing. I think it's fine to say it is, but even if it's like the field itself is emergent from other fields or whatever, I'm fine with that too. It makes no difference to my argument.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I'll have a think about it. Thank you for answering.
Yep. Jin is a void puppet, confirmed. Anybody else got any questions, comments, stuff? All right, I'm gonna head off, get some more food. Thanks for joining the after show, guys. Thanks for showing up to the Discord, and like, comment, subscribe, stuff, YouTuber stuff, give me money stuff. Peace out. See you later.
Thanks,
Bye,
TJump.
Tom.
I don't know how to end the stream on this. Where's the